Good evening, I'm Pontius Pilate. When I speak of my past, I speak of a distant time, a turbulent era, and a tormented land. It was around 26 AD, during the reign of Tiberius, when I assumed the office of prefect of Judea. My story is intertwined with the fabric of an era, the threads interwoven with the history of Roman power, Jewish resistance, and particularly with one man whom the world has never forgotten. My story is intertwined with the fabric of an era, the threads interwoven with the history of Roman power, Jewish resistance, and particularly with one man whom the world has never forgotten. I am known as a Roman official and military man with a tough character, incorruptible, and with a clear vision of my duty towards Rome. I was a soldier before becoming a prefect, and such a spirit of duty and discipline permeated my every act. An attitude that was sometimes interpreted as cruel, but to me, it was simply a way to maintain order in a turbulent territory. During my decade of governance, Judea was a land inflamed with religious, cultural, and political tensions. Rebels, zealots, and emerging prophets sought to challenge the authority of Rome, and my task was to maintain peace and order. I tried to introduce the image of the emperor in Jerusalem, an act that provoked strong protest. I also attempted to build an aqueduct using funds collected in the temple, an ambitious but necessary project for the welfare of the people. The Roman occupation of Judea was not a simple task, far from it. What we faced was a world of deeply rooted traditions and beliefs, a people firm and determined to preserve their identity. This indomitable spirit made administration and peace preservation difficult. One anecdote that comes to mind is an attempt to introduce effigies of the emperor in Jerusalem. I thought that inserting symbols of Roman power would strengthen our control. But I was wrong. This act was seen as a provocation, a violation of Mosaic laws that prohibited images. The reaction was immediate and fierce, sparking protests and unrest. I still remember the faces of the men and women, their firm and resolved gaze as they protested. It was a harsh lesson for me. Another attempt at Romanization was the construction of an aqueduct. I had planned to use temple funds to finance the project, convinced it would bring welfare and progress. Again, the people rose up. The fury caused by that attempt at progress remains etched in my memory, a clear sign of how delicate the situation was. Life in Judea was a balancing act. One wrong move, one miscalculated decision could easily trigger revolt. And although my seat was in Caesarea, where Roman presence was stronger, the heart of the problem was always Jerusalem, a city where tradition and modernity clashed every day. On the other hand, there was the interest of Rome, whose authority I had to represent and defend. The internal balances of the empire, the tensions between my position and the governor of Syria, all this contributed to making my role more difficult. Some historians have described me as a corrupt and cruel man, and partly it is true. I had great power in Judea, but in reality I used my power and authority sometimes, or perhaps often, arbitrarily in the personal interest of Rome. I did not have a high regard for the Jews, considering their priests to be annoying, false, opportunistic, and arrogant. It is also true that often I condemned people without even trying them, but this too was in the interest of Rome. In doubt, I condemned to death. My philosophy was that if a finger was hurting, it was better to cut off the whole arm. In your sacred books, you have painted me as weak, subjugated by the Judaic priests, lacking even the courage to make a simple decision without their authorization. Never has such a description been farther from reality, and now I will describe it better. Despite these challenges, my story is often overshadowed by my encounter with a single man, Jesus of Nazareth. Christian sources and Tacitus attribute to me a key role in Jesus' trial, but my reasons were far from religious representations. Jesus was handed over to me by the Jewish Sanhedrin, who considered him a blasphemer and pressured me to take action. I must admit, at first I tried to avoid the issue. But then, I had a personal encounter with him. I had the chance to look into the eyes of this man, a man who did not bow before me in Rome, who did not recognize my authority, but who emanated a strange aura of calm and confidence. First of all, I want to clarify some points that differ from what has been told to you so far. I laugh when I read that I would have let the Judean people, or Jerusalemites as we called the citizens of Jerusalem, decide the fate of Jesus, giving them the choice to release either him or a certain Barabbas, guilty, according to your religious text, of killing a Roman soldier, and this during the Jewish religious Passover. Thus, the crowd in front of the two defendants chose to release Barabbas, the man accused of killing a Roman soldier, and I consequently released this Barabbas, and with much reluctance condemned Jesus. Are you crazy? Who do you think I was? I am Pontius Pilate, prefect and highest authority of Rome in Galilee. Do you think that I would release a rebel guilty of killing a Roman soldier? Did you really believe this nonsense? Don't you know that I have sentenced people to death for much, much less than this? If a rebel had only brushed a Roman soldier threatening his authority, he was already lucky if I only sentenced him to death. I was not cruel. I was the representative, the authority of a power tied to a mentality of that time. A mentality that is hard for you to understand today, perhaps. But back then, there were no discussion salons. Our ethics were completely different, and what was different from us was only tolerated if it was useful or harmless. The rest was destroyed, no ifs, ands, or buts. Furthermore, another thing that makes me laugh is that this grace to Barabbas I would have given on the occasion of a Judaic religious holiday. We Romans did not recognize the religious festivals of the countries we occupied. Sure, we tolerated them if they did not threaten our authority, but we did not recognize them. Even less, we were willing to honor them. My festivals were called Saturnalia, and I still have many fond memories of the week of festivity in youth, of the revelry and things of which soberly I am not so proud to tell. How much wine I drank at Bacchanalia and many others, especially the imperial festivities, which I tried to establish even in Galilee with very little success. Anyway, let's return to when Jesus was handed over to me. He arrived before me bound, wearing a simple tunic, sad but not frightened. You must know that as far as I was concerned, at that time there were many prophets. I heard so many. We Romans would burst out laughing at times, at the things they claimed to be and represent. But punctually, when any of them found themselves in my presence, they trembled, peed themselves from fear, were ready to turn any loyalty to Rome, and kneeled at the slightest hint asking for mercy. But he did not. He stood in silence and did not keep his gaze low. On the contrary, he looked at me. But it was not a gaze that wanted to instill fear or resentful, not at all. When my eyes met his, I had the same feeling as when my mother, as a child, looked at me while I tried to fall asleep in her arms. Incredibly and inexplicably, I was the first to look away. The thing had disconcerted me. This man did not seem like the usual Judaic prophet who declared himself son or brother of Moses or Abraham, or who knows who sent by them to convert the people or who knows what. I asked him arrogantly and with superiority, "Who do you claim to be?" He calmly replied, "Who do you say I am?" I don't know what happened to me, but I felt an incredible internal reaction, like an inner struggle between a part of me, more intimate, that wanted to kneel and listen to him for hours, and another part of me, more external, that wanted to teach him a lesson and hated him for his attitude. Believe me, the words came out of my mouth without my realizing it. So I quickly replied without thinking, "Are you the Messiah?" A word I'd heard from the Jews. Their religion made me laugh, and I actually paid no attention to it. He, still looking me in the eyes, replied, "You have said so." At this point, the more cynical and cruel part of me took over. The priests of the Sanhedrin had told me many things about him, and I even heard that some Roman soldiers and authorities had turned to him for help or listened with interest to his preachings. I had already decided what fate I would assign to him. So I said to him again, "I was told you are the servant of your God." But he replied, "A father has sons, not servants. You in this world are useful but not indispensable. For our Father it is exactly the opposite." And continued, "I came to serve, not to be served." At that point, I realized that this man was dangerous. I didn't just see him as a leader who would incite a revolution. Much worse, this man was dangerous from the inside. He could cause much greater damage to the authority and dominion of Rome over Galilee. So I decided and sentenced immediately. Turning to my subordinates with a simple gesture, I condemned him to death. I said to him, "Now your God will pour his vengeance upon me if you are truly this Messiah." And he, with a very serene and sad look at the same time, replied, "You have nothing to fear from our Father. Punishments and vengeance you are very good at giving to each other. So whatever you have already decided to do, do it." I took this as a further affront, and turning again to my subordinate said, "Before carrying out the sentence, give him a special treatment, so he returns to this father of his with a fond memory of our authority." At that point, I washed my hands, a gesture that had a very different meaning for me than what you declare in your religious books, and I left. His attitude, along with the pressure of the Sanhedrin and the potential threat to stability he represented, had forced me to make a decision. Despite my wife warning me not to have anything to do with him, I decided to condemn Jesus to death. Not for religious reasons, but to preserve order and Roman authority. After my decision, my life continued. But in 36 AD, I was deposed for my harsh repression of the Samaritans during the revolt at Mount Gerizim and was recalled to Rome. But before I could reach Rome, Tiberius died and my figure disappears. My fate remains a mystery, a shadow on an already dark story. My name, Pontius Pilate, has entered history as the man who condemned Jesus. But my story is much more. It's the story of a Roman official who tried to govern a complicated land, to maintain peace and order amidst chaos, to do the best possible in a difficult situation. This is my story, my truth, and now I share it with you. That's why, dear listeners, when you hear my name, I want you to understand that I was not just the prefect who condemned Jesus. My reign was not guided solely by ferocity, but also by a sense of responsibility and attention to public order. My life in Judea was not simple. Revolts and tensions were almost a daily occurrence, and the encounter with Jesus of Nazareth only added to the complexity of my position. However, I remained faithful to my mission to safeguard Rome's authority. There is a particular conversation with Jesus that deeply touched me. "What is truth?" I asked him. I never received a direct answer from him, but his words and conduct led me to reflect more deeply on my role, on justice, and on the authority I wielded. Even after his death, the echo of his words stayed with me. I had to deal with the consequences of my decision and the influence this figure had on the people. There is a particular night I still remember when my wife, disturbed by a dream, implored me not to have anything to do with that righteous man. Her anguish, her torment, is a memory I have never been able to erase. Yet in the end, I had to do what I believed was right for the good of Rome. My duty was to maintain peace, and I did everything possible to preserve it. It was not an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. The last phase of my life remains shrouded in mystery. After my dismissal, I was recalled to Rome. However, my figure disappears from historical sources and my fate remains unknown. Some might consider this an act of divine justice, a punishment for my actions. But I prefer to think that it is simply the way life works, an endless cycle of causes and effects. Today, as I reflect on my life and my role in history, I feel a certain bitterness. Not for the decisions I made, but for how I am remembered. I am known mainly for the trial of Jesus, a single event in a long and complex career. But I want you to know that I was not just the prefect who condemned Jesus. I was a man who tried to do his best in a time of great challenges and conflicts. My name is Pontius Pilate, and this is my story.